Let's, huh? Okay. All right, welcome back. Hope everyone had a nice break. I'm going to introduce our speaker. Our speaker is Bryon Clark. He is a nature enthusiast, lifelong nature enthusiast since his childhood spent on a farm in Iowa. He currently lives near Sherman, Texas. He has a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD, all in biology. And during his postdoctoral research, it was part teaching and part research of the cave use patterns of the Ozark Big-eared Bat in Oklahoma. I'm sorry, I can't read my handwriting. So he worked as a faculty administrator at Southeastern Oklahoma State University for 30 years and taught a variety of courses on mammalogy, general biology, wildlife management, and more. He's published more than 30 scientific articles and presented more than 60 presentations at scientific meetings. He volunteers, he's in our own chapter, he's one of our own, and with several other organizations as well. And he does say he is willing to share stories and information about mammals and nature to anyone who will listen. So, so we are in good hands with this. So everyone, Bryon Clark.
Hello. Oh, excellent. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about bats and sort of trace my history a little bit. And sometimes what I refer to this program is the bat that changed my life. Especially when I talk to younger kids about these seminal moments in their life that they make a decision. Sometimes it's a good decision, sometimes it's a bad decision. So here's a symbol of Wufu, which is a Chinese symbol of good luck. And it used to be the symbol for Bat Conservation International when Merlin Tuttle was the president. Since then, they've had new leadership come in and they've changed the logo for BCI. But this is the original one, and I always like to show it, and I'll come back to that. Let's see, how are these things showing? It's sort of light in here. I want everybody, choose your method of locomotion. I want you to get in your DeLorean, your phone booth from Bill and Ted's Big Adventure, or your time machine from Big Bang Theory, or what would be a hot tub from Hot Tub Time Machine. Get back in that, and let's go back to 1965, because at that point, I was in second grade, and Mrs. Coulter was somewhat surprised. I was raised in a small farmhouse on a small farm that was built in the 1880s. I'm not quite that old, but it was an old house. And when I was in second grade, my parents decided to box in the front porch. It was an open air porch, and box it in because then they had 3 boys and we were running them up. So when they pulled off the sheeting, and I was helping my dad, as were my brothers, and my mom as well, in between the rafters was a little bat. And I put that bat in a box, and I took it to school to Mrs. Coulter's second grade class for show and tell. Now, you can't do that anymore. But back in the day, teachers sort of, they earned hazard pay because they never knew what was coming to class. It could be a frog, it could be a salad, it could be a snake, it could be a rock. Who knows what was showing up? But I brought that bat to school. But that's not the bat that changed my life. I think it was a bat that maybe foreshadowed what was to come. Because when I went to Central College, a small liberal arts college in Pella, Iowa, I had a wonderful mentor and advisor named John Bowles. And he took us on a field trip down. I knew I was going to have big fingers. Back. He took us on a field trip down to Pilot Knob Mine. Okay. Pilot Knob Mine is a very special place. It's near sort of south and west of St. Louis, Missouri. And it's a hibernaculum or overwintering site for the endangered Indiana bat. About 60% of the known population of Indiana bats at that time were overwintering in that particular mine. So it was sort of critical. But at that mine at a different location. We went down there on a fall field trip during fall swarming, and it was a busy time. We went down there and we captured about 3,000 bats in about a half hour, 15 minutes to a half hour in a Tuttle trap or Constantine trap, where there's two types of can wires, if you will, on a big frame, and the bats fly through the front wires, and then they hit the back wire and they fall into a big bag. So we set it up for about 15 minutes in the cave entrance, or maybe a little over, and then spent the rest of the night taking information off those bats. So we'd tag them, we'd say whether male or female, take some measurements and put a numbered band on them and let them go. So that was the first big experience. But on April 18th, 1979, a female Indiana bat was banded at this cave. This is Richard Laval, who was the bat biologist for the state of Missouri at the time. My advisor's here, and his dog Ginger is there. So we were down there. Richard banded this bat, and lo and behold, on June 30th, this bat changed my life. We captured that bat 73 days later, and it came from Pilot Knob Mine here and flew all the way up to Iowa, about 463 kilometers away. Not much was known about those bats at that time. The Indiana bat was endangered. The females dispersed someplace to go have their babies. Males were just hanging around wherever. And we captured that bat. She had just given birth, and you could tell, you could feel a space in the pelvic girdle in between where the pubic symphysis pulls apart a little bit. And then she was lactating. So we knew it was a female that had just given birth because you could palpitate the nipple and get a little milk. Well, since not much was known, my advisor happened to get a grant. And it was to look at the distribution of the Indiana bat in Iowa. So over the course of 3 summers, during 121 nights of netting, we set up mist nets across creeks, streams, trails, or whatever. Hopefully we'd catch a bat. And if we caught a bat, we would band the bat and take critical measurements: length of the forearm, length of the 5th metacarpal, length of the 3rd metacarpal, length of the ear, length of the tragus, and weigh it, and then determine its sexual reproduction, whether it's a male or female, breeding condition, non-breeding condition, whether it's pregnant or lactating or whatever. And we recorded all that information. And over those 3 years, captured a little over 1,100 bats, including 68 endangered species. And that's what gave me my master's thesis. So what happened was that one bat that we caught in June of 79 led to this study starting in 1980. And that's probably why I'm here today, because without catching that one bat, who knows where I would have been. I don't know if I'd have gone on for my master's or not. Then if we look, when after completing my master's, I got sidetracked, went to Kansas State and worked on small mammal response to prairie fires on Konza Prairie Research Natural Area, something about topography. But then I went to Stillwater, did a postdoc on Ozark Big-eared Bats. And then when I got to Southeastern, as an assistant professor, we received a grant to chase after bats, endangered bats in public areas in eastern Oklahoma. So the triangles are where we were doing the netting over here. 75, 3 years, 1,500 bats, including 18 Ozark Big-eared Bats, endangered subspecies, 3 gray bats, which were an endangered species as well. And I'll come back to some other data about that, but I've handled lots and lots and lots of bats over the course of my time. Now, what's the first word that you think of when I say the word bats? Anybody? Rabies? Oh. Was squeak? I heard squeak, rabies, something else? Q? I heard it there. Vampires. Usually I get vampires pretty early on. They're pretty close here. But there's 3 kinds of vampire bats. Okay? 3 kinds of vampire bats. There's the common vampire bat up at the top. Okay? There is the hairy-legged vampire bat, and then there's and the white-winged vampire bat. Now, what happens is all three of these do feed on blood meals. Uh, a couple of them feed a little bit on blood of birds, so turkeys and chickens and stuff like that. Common vampire bat's more of a mammal specialist, but has sharp little incisors, bites, canines, and most people think, you see these pictures and weird stuff on TV about bats latching onto you and say, nah, they don't do that. What they do is they have those super sharp teeth. They make a puncture mark and they have a special substance in their saliva. And the commercial name is called Draculin. I'm not going to give you the science. Who would come up with that? Well, it's a substance that actually prevents the blood from clotting. So what happens is they make a bite, the blood starts to flow out, and instead of sucking on it, they sit there, they got a groove in their chin, and they lap up the blood coming out of the wound, just like a dog would lap up water from a water dish. Now, once that bat finishes, flies off, what happens? Well, the wound cleanses itself. It continues to flow for a little bit, washes out that particular substance in the saliva of the bat, and then it scabs over just like normal. So it's pretty efficient. A lot of money's been spent by people trying to study this particular substance because it's one of the most effective anti-clotting devices, and all those people with heart issues, coronary issues, are trying to mimic that and make some money. These bats are pretty cool. I've had the good pleasure of handling both the common vampire bat and the hairy-legged vampire bat through time. We'll talk. Let me give me one. There was some snacks out there, but that I remember I got I ate too much at the Christmas party at the last meeting of the year last year. Everybody had the holiday party that was here, and did you eat too much? Well, think of these vampire bats. And I go through this story with a kid. How many hot dogs do you think you can eat? And they would say, I can eat 5 or 6 or 10 or something like that. And I said, these vampire bats might weigh about 50 grams or a little bit more, but they can eat about half their body weight in a single blood meal. And then they walk around on their wrists, and then they're able to fly. Well, and I sort of said, okay, if you buy hot dogs and you get plumpers or a pound bag and you usually get 8 to 10 hot dogs, let's say 10, it'd be easier. 10 hot dogs. And I asked, how much do you weigh? Well, I weigh 50 pounds, or some of them are 80 pounds, depending on the age. Let's say 80 pounds. And they're going to eat half their body weight. So they're going to eat, 40 pounds of hot dogs, and there's 10 hot dogs per pound. I mean, they're kicking Joey Chestnut's in hot dog eating contest. Everybody familiar with Joey Chestnut, the world champion hot dog eating every year at Labor Day? So, I mean, think about eating that much food and still being able to fly off. Now, what are bats? Well, let's have some fundamental to get everybody on the same page here. Bats are unique mammals. So the mammals, that they're the only mammals that are capable of true flight. Okay. So they can have sustained flight. They're not a glider like around here. You might have a southern flying squirrel. It glides and it'll crash to the earth after a period of time because of the force of gravity. You might have a sugar glider. It glides as well. You might have a flying lemur, and that one just kills me as a mammologist. It can't fly and it's not a lemur. I don't know what's wrong with it. So I'm not sure, but bats have that, and they're capable of true flight. So no matter what kind of bat you're talking about, they can fly. Now, it's fairly important out here. Here's a female Brazilian free-tailed bat with a pup. Pups are pretty helpless at birth. Most of the time they're naked, hairless, can't thermoregulate very well, and oftentimes they're put in large maternity colonies, like going to the hospital, there's a maternity ward. Well, all these babies are clustered up in some place to keep each other warm when mom's out feeding. Well, mom feeds the baby's milk, just like in all other mammals. The production of milk is unique. that they're producing something, changing the foods that they eat into milk to nurse their babies for a period of time. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a whale, an elephant, a bat, a shrew, it doesn't matter what kind of mammal, they all produce it. And it's usually females. A colleague of mine, Tom Kuntz, worked with some people in India, a couple of colleagues of his, and they actually found a species of bat in which the males actually lactate. As some people might say, men are not as efficient as women, or males aren't as efficient as women, and they only produce about 10% of the milk that the females do. But they still had functional mammary glands and were able to produce milk. So that's the only one that I'm aware of right now that has that. So flight, mammals have the ability to produce milk, so bats are that way. And babies are pretty quick. In a matter of 5 to 6 weeks, and here's a young bat, babies can fly. Now, if they're chasing after insects or something like that, it's hard for them to get food. So mom is still nursing them for a period of time, but they're able to strengthen their wings and get more agile and flying and stuff like that. So depending on the species, it might take a little longer, take a little shorter. If it's a cold year, then it takes a little longer because there's trying to stay warm and burning energy instead of growth. They're burning it to stay warm. And then most bats can do something called echolocation. And there's acoustic studies of bats going on by a lot of naturalists. And we got Linton here that's coordinating some of that for the Blackland Prairie chapter. Got a project going on up at Hagman as well. Echolocation, emitting these ultrasonic sounds that you and I can't hear, though bats do make some audible sounds. They hiss and cuss at me when I've handled them in the net. Especially red bats and hoary bats, they'll splay their wings out. It's not fun. But if you look at bats, and there's two different groups that we'll talk about, the microbats or the microchiropterans all echolocate, very good at it. And they vary a little bit of how they do it, but they all echolocate and they use it. The megachiropterans, the flying foxes and the like, only one species, Egyptian Rosetius bat, can echolocate, and it makes a clicking sound. It's not the same kind of echolocation made by the microchiropterans. So echolocation is something. Now, bats are in the class Mammalia. So class, if we think about our types of animals, class, so there's a class Amphibia for the frogs and salamanders, there's a class Reptilia, there's a class Aves, a class Mammalia, there's a class Osteoichthyes, a Chondrichthyes, the different groups. So big group up there. And in that class, there's a single order called Chiroptera. That name sounds a little bit like chiropractor. Well, chiropractors use their hands to do manipulations. So the word Chiroptera means handling, because when you look at a bat, here's its forearm, or upper arm, sorry. Here's his forearm, here's the wrist, the thumb, and the first finger, second finger, third finger, and fourth finger. Okay? So handling, most of the membrane that provides the surface for flight is in between these elongated fingers. So it goes from here to here. Let me go back. You can see it on this flying fox here. Here's the membrane. Here's the fifth metacarpal coming here. The first and second one are fused. The thumb is right there. So it's coming here. This membrane attaches to the foot, comes out here, here, here. And some bats do have a membrane down here, a tail membrane called the uropatagium. So you have it. And if you look at this, just like all other mammals, I mean, bats have the same basic body plan of other mammals or other vertebrates. I mean, they got a leg bone and a knee bone and stuff like that. But they're arranged a little bit differently. They might be longer or shorter out there than you see some other ones. Now, let's talk just a minute about echolocation. So bats are emitting these echolocative cries, and bats, in contrast to us, and a lot of mammals, they have an asymmetric skull. The right side isn't a mirror image of the left side. So microfractions of a second, the sound that goes out comes back and strikes the skull at slightly different points, and they might orientate their head a little bit. And the tragus does some stuff, but not much, a little flap in the ear. that you see right here. So the sound waves goes out, it hits an object and bounces back. So it's going out. And then if you look here, when it comes back, it's hard to see in the lighting condition, but there's just an infinitesimal small difference between when that sound is perceived by the right and left ear. Now, bats are pretty cool because they can tell something about how far something is away by using echolocation. They can tell whether it's getting closer or farther away. They can tell the texture. Is it spiny, rough, bumpy? And they can tell something about, is it soft or hard? So they can perceive all sorts of stuff through their echolocative cries and not literally see it. But bats do have a good sense of vision. It's not the same as yours or mine, but they can see. And oftentimes bats will fly without doing echolocation, especially on well moonlit nights in familiar areas where there's not a lot of ground clutter, a lot of trees or branches or stuff like that. Flying because what? It takes a lot of energy to echolocate. They're using muscle and making that sound all along. So they can do all sorts of stuff with it. But you might have aerial insectivores and see some pretty cool dynamics of the bat. The bat will detect it. And then oftentimes it's either captured in one wing or the other wing or in the tail, and then it'll transfer it to the tail and do a somersault midair and transfer that bug to its mouth. I mean, you don't have much surface area as you go trying to catch bugs, right? So you've got all the surface area on your wings and tail membrane to catch something. So they take advantage of that and then they transfer, and then they might do some aerial gymnastics to transfer that to their mouth from the wings or the tail. If you're thinking about going down, if you ever have a chance, BCI, Bat Conservation International, owns Bracken Cave. It's a place to go see. It's the largest aggregation of mammals on the face of the planet. About 20 million female bats give birth to their babies, and usually those types of bats give birth to a single pup. So after the pups have been born and start flying, you might see, 30 million bats fly out. And it takes a long, 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 long time. Well, can you imagine? You think DFW Airport is got some cluttered airspace. Think about 20 or 30 million bats flying out of a single opening that's not much bigger than, it's smaller than this room. So they're boiling out and they form these big plumes that looks like smoke coming up of somebody burning tires or something like that. And that smoke goes out in the sky and then another one will go off. So they're circling in there, usually counterclockwise, and then they fly out. Then they're still circling, another group flies out. So echolocation, they're not trying to run into each other because it's not good. Because if they do, at the Bracken Cave or Eckert James River Bat Cave, Rio Frio Cave, or some of the other places, on the ground there's raccoons and skunks and coyotes and snakes of a variety of sorts, all waiting for a baby or some other bat to fall to the ground because they hit and they're cleaning up the trash, the bats that fell to the ground. Or there's hawks and owls feeding on the bats as they come out, because you got a pretty dense thing, and all you have to do is close your eyes and hope that you hit something, and they're going to get a bat to eat. And then sometimes bats are able, my fingers, coming into a prickly thing like a cactus, it's pretty important that you get the right place that you want to stick your nose. And then over here, some of the caves, there's snakes that hang from the ceiling of the caves, like Bat Cave. This Bat Cave here, I think this one's from Puerto Rico. And snakes are there trying to catch the bats as they fly out. So you want to avoid those if you possibly can. Now, bats, find them every place. Almost any place you want to go. This is a species diversity of bats throughout the world. If you look at North America, we're sort of blue up here, and then you get yellow into the southwest, and then down here you get a lot of red. Not much up here. Well, think of it this way. The closer you get to the equator, the more bats you have. And a country like Colombia, which is the United States is almost 9 times bigger than Colombia. They have over 200 species of bats in Colombia, that little. And in the United States, we have about 45. So as you get closer, there's more things to eat. There's fruit, there's insects, there's this and that and the other. So you see the distributions of bats there. So no matter where you go, you're going to find bats, except for the polar regions. You're not going to find them up near the North Pole. You're not going to find them in Antarctica. No, you're not going to find them in the top of the Himalayas, up where there's no bugs or something for them to eat. And the other place you won't find them is in the middle of something like the Sahara Desert. But you will find them at the oases in the Sahara Desert. They're not going to be out there flying in the middle of no place looking for something that's not there to eat. But if you have a water source and food, you're probably going to have bats at that oasis, even if it's isolated a couple 100 miles from the next closest water source. Just think of it this way. There's an endemic species, a species of bat found no place else in Hawaii called the Hawaiian hoary bat. Well, Hawaiian hoary bat, that's a volcanic island that appeared up out of no place. So there was nothing living on there at first, and those bats got out all the way there. I mean, anybody been to Hawaiian Islands? Did you get FBS when you went to the Hawaiian Islands? You're not familiar with FBS? Flat butt syndrome from sitting so long to get across the ocean? I mean, that's a long way out there. And the Hawaiian hoary bat actually made it all the way out there. Now, order Chiroptera. We talked briefly about this in megas that can't do it. So not very diverse. There's only one family and 196 species. And you're only finding them in the old world. So Europe, Asia, Africa, they're not going to be here. And oftentimes they're associated with the world's biggest bat or these big fruit bats or flying foxes. Now, here you go. I don't know if this is the biggest one, but it's in the conversation. That the golden crowned fruit bat, if you take finger and stick out here, you take your other finger and stick out here, I've got right at a 6-foot wingspan. So flying foxes, this one in particular, has about a 5.5 to 6-foot wingspan. Now, they weigh about 4 to 5 pounds. I'm a smidge chunkier than 4 to 5 pounds, but the wingspan here, so I might be more intimidating flying towards you like this. But think about those wings coming out there. Now, the world's smallest bat is called the bumblebee bat, or Kitty's hognose bat, wasn't found until the 1970s in a country called Thailand. And it's an endangered species out there, as many bats are. And it has a wingspan of about 5 to 7 inches, depending on which one you get. And the easiest thing to do, it's the world's smallest bat. It's the world's smallest mammal. You put it on your finger and it weighs less than a dime. So it's going to be 4 or 5 grams at max. So couple out there. The Kitty's hognose bat or bumblebee bat, not much bigger than bumblebee, but if you think of that, here's where most of the bats occur. 20 different families, 20 different kinds of big groups of bats. When you think of families, think of something like carnivores. You got your dog family, your cat family, your bear family, your raccoon family. What else? Bear family. And then you've got some aquatic carnivores as well. Well, there's 20 different kinds of bat families out there with 1,294 different species. I keep having to update this every year. And these are found all over the place. So no matter where you go in the world, you're going to find these, except those places I've described before. Not quite the size range in bats here in the United States. Here's the little American parastrel. It used to be called the Western pipistrelle bat out in East or West Texas. Here, it's the smallest bat that we have in Texas. And the Western bonneted bat, it's also used to be referred to as the Western mastiff bat. So it has a wingspan of not quite 2 feet, something like that, and it weighs 1.5 pounds or so. So not quite the size variation you see worldwide with the flying foxes, but you do see some variation here in the size of bats. Now, let's test your knowledge. I have to update this all the time. How many bats do you think occur worldwide? There's about 6,800 kinds of mammals. When I first started teaching mammalogy long ago, there's only 4,000 plus kinds of mammals. Now there's almost 7,000 mammals in 35 years, something like that. So how many bats do you think are out in the world? Any guesses? 1,500. Yeah, you're adding those two numbers together, right? Excellent. Yeah.
The number of individual bats.
Number of species. Because we can get closer to that one. So 1,500 is pretty close. It's 1,490. Back in the day, it was a smidge over 900 when I taught mammalogy for the first time. Now, you don't have your, I mentioned this in passing. How many kinds of bats do you think are in the United States? 40. I hope I remembered right. Yeah, oh, yeah, 45. Now, let's go to Texas. How many do you think occurred in Texas?
45.
Okay, yeah, I usually go with kids. This is a good number exercise. How many bats do you think occur in Texas now? If there's 45 in the United States and Texas is only one of the states, is that number greater than 45 or less than 45? So there's about 33 kinds of bats in here. And then if we go Oklahoma, I know we shouldn't mention that name here, but hey, it paid the bills for me for a long time and still is through my retirement, so I can't complain. Oklahoma, not as big, but about 24 species. And this go to north central Texas. How many bats do you think occur potentially in this area, right here in north central? Not all the way to the east and not, further south too far, but how many? Any guess? 10, 15, 20? I'm going with 12. And what I did, I looked at the range map and then I added the bat and subtracted the bat because of some of the work that I've been doing. Now, here's a quick snapshot of bats of Texas. It's missing the hairy-legged vampire bat, but you can download this thing if you want, but it shows pictures of all the bats. But let's look at, there's only two families of bats in the here in this area of North Texas. There's the family Vespertilionidae. These are known as the Vesper bats. Back in the day, evening vespers played by church bells or other things. So bats coming out of the belfry. So the Vespertilionidae, the evening or common bats. Most widespread out there, there's over 400 species of these, all the continents except Antarctica. Second most speciose family behind the rats and mice, the Muridae. Bats are behind the order Rodentia as the second most diverse order of mammals. You got the rodents, about 40%. You got the bats, about 20%. So those two groups of mammals comprise over 60% of all known mammals on the planet. Now, 3 to 45 grams, wingspan, 30 to 130. Simple face, you'll hear nose leaf. A lot of bats, especially the spear nose bats or phylostomids, have a bump on their nose, a leaf that sticks up there. And it's thought that it helps us with echolocation, but I'm not a big proponent or buyer of that. Eyes are pretty hidden by fur. The ears have a well-established tragus, this little flap of skin that also helps with sound. And females tend to be larger than males. I mean, I've heard some stories, and my wife told me some as well. I mean, can you imagine giving birth to a baby that's about 60% of your body mass? So in bats, at least certain species, the baby or babies represent about 60% of the female's body mass. So she's going to be a little bit bigger than the male, and then she's responsible for providing the nourishment through milk. So going out and feeding regularly to get nourishment so that she can bring back and nurse the babies. Study we did in the northeastern Oklahoma and Ozark Big-eared Bats. Females early in the season came back to the cave 3 times to nurse the babies, and mid-season came back twice, once in the middle, and then at the end of the season, they, do what you want at home. They leave at dusk and come back at dawn. So as they're growing early on, coming back several times to nurse, a little bit less later on, and then out and getting ready for hibernation so she makes it through the winter. Insects, small arthropods, we got 25 of these in Texas and 11 probably here in north central area. Up in the upper right, the Mammals of Texas book, I took a map there. You can see here's distribution of the red bat. All my netting of bats, this was about 60% of all bats I ever captured and missed nets out here. Widespread, common, reddish, orange, brown. It looks a little bit, it's more red than the Seminole bat. And the main thing is the lazarine bats, it's in a group that the tail membrane is furred. So when you capture it, the hoary bat and the red bat and the Seminole bat in this area, if you look at the membrane in between the legs, where the caudal vertebrae go down the middle, it'll have fur on the top of it. It won't be naked. And later on, I have some bats up here. You can see that fur that you can see out there. Size is there. They're a little bit migratory, so they are roosters under leaves and branches of trees. So the most common bat that I get a bat call for that's on the ground is red bats. So I go try to rescue bats. I get calls to go do that. And when you have a heavy rainstorm or windstorm, what happens is the bats are knocked to the ground. In general, these bats have about 3 pups, which is more than the average. Bats, there are usually 1 or 2, but these have 3, sometimes up to 5, because you want one to make it through to carry on your genes to the next generation. So you're not hedging your bet on one of them being succumbed to the heavy winds out there. Spanish moss and stuff, especially in the deep south, are out there. Lasios means hair, aura is the tail, so it's got a hairy tail. Borealis means north. So this is the eastern red bat. I don't know why they didn't call it eastern. Then big brown bat. Well, as you might guess, it's big, it's brown, it's a bat. So it's a big brown bat. Widespread and common. There's an area that is right through here that lack of records out there. Large, chocolatey, chestnut brown on the back, a little bit lighter on the belly. And it's one of the chunkier bats that we have in this area. The wingspan of a hoary bat's a little bit bigger, but in terms of weight, it's there. Hibernates in caves, mines, and buildings. It adapts well to humans pretty well. 1 pup, and if I get a bat call and it's in the building, it's usually this one. There's other bats I do rescue from buildings, but this one is out there. And Pessicus means house flyer, and Fuscus means brown, a house flying brown bat. This one, it does pretty well. In the middle of the night, we were chasing bats, netting bats out in eastern Oklahoma. I don't know if anybody knows where Tallahassee, Oklahoma is, but there is a pool hall there that used to be a beauty parlor, a hair salon, I guess. And they were renovating the 2nd floor of this hair salon. It was a 2-story event. They had all the windows out, and in the bottom, they had the pool hall there. And get a call up because all over the eastern part of the state, and I said, we want to get rid of these bats. I mean, people are, I'm not making this up. People are swinging pool cues. They're going to hit somebody because they're trying to chase the bats out of here that are flying through the pool hall. Well, they had the windows out, no screens, nothing. And can we pour hot water? We hear them squeaking upstairs. Can we pour hot water or acid or something on them to get rid of them? Yeah, I'm not making this up. I mean, so I said, don't do anything. So I grabbed my minnow buckets. I usually carry, when I go on a bat call, you never know how many you get. So minnow buckets, a lot of holes in there, and there's a big opening, and you can grab a handful of bats if you need to and stuff them in there, and they're going to be fine. Well, I go there, and what happens is underneath a window, they were here, and if you've ever bought a bat house, you know that has screening in there for them to hang their little toes on. Well, window, and then here's the screen underneath, and a group of female big brown bats established a maternity colony up there. So in the middle of the night, I go to the pool hall. I rescue as many bats. There was about 50 some odd adults and about 30 young in my minnow buckets, go home, which was about an hour and a half away. And in the middle of the night, I stuffed them in an extra bat box I had, put a board across the bottom so they wouldn't fly out in the middle of the night, and then hung it up on the tree. Neighbors probably thought I was crazy out there at about 2:30 in the morning. And then the next morning, I went back up there, pulled the board out, and those bats lived there for the next 15 years that I stayed in that house. And they were still there for a while after I sold and moved elsewhere, but then they tore down the bat house. So don't count on these things because I got a bat house at home. I've had 2 bats or the droppings of bats that ever show up in the last 20 years. So I'm not very happy with that. So go figure. But big brown bats are out there. Hoary bat, they just changed the name. It used to be Laziers, but now it's Orestes scenarios. Aerial means to hover or fly about. Adestes means eater, and scenarios ashen or gray. So that's probably my favorite bat. It looks like it's just been to the beauty parlor, if you will. It's got a tricolored hair. It's got frosted white tips, so its hair is frosted. Then it has a dark middle, and then a brown base. So you got this tricolored hair on it. Has a big old wing strand. It's migratory, north in the spring, south in the fall. This one in red bats, a little bit susceptible because of their movements in the silver-haired bat. We'll talk about here in a moment. Some of the wind farms, there's conflicting information about what happens with those. Branches and leaves of trees again. So they have a big litter, 1 to 4 out there. So caught a bunch of these, same group, but not near as prevalent as the red bats. Evening bat, eastern half of the state, rich dark brown chocolate, for contrast of really dark black ears. So you'll see that stick out. They stay here throughout Texas year round. Usually loose bark, tree crevices, buildings, bat houses, pretty adaptable. Nictesius means belonging to the knight humoralis of the forelimb. So you have this bat that's flying around out there. And then the American Perimyotis, we call it tricolored bat here. Back in the day, I called it the Eastern Pipistrelle. So it's gone through something. Used to be Pipistrella subflavus, and now it's Perimyotis for some reason. So you'll find these throughout the much of Texas, except for the very western edge. Smallest bat that you'll find in this area, and you'll see this really extension, this sort of a yellowy color bat, and striking black wings with red bones sticking in there. So you'll see this contrast when you handle them. Hibernates in caves and mines out there, decimated by white nose syndrome. About 90% of all tricolored bats have been decimated by white nose. Caves, cliff faces, a couple of pups. Prairie means about, mice means mice. I mean, the old name of bats, the Germans gave them a name called Fledermaus, but they're not mice, but they flutter around. Otis is ear, sub, below, flavus, yellow. So as you break these things down, sometimes it makes sense, and other times you ask, why did they go down that road? Silver-haired bat, this one is a good migrator through here. I was surprised when I got here. I've only captured them in the spring and the fall. In Iowa, they were, I think, the 3rd most abundant bat we captured because they would have their maternity colonies up there. Here, they're migratory. They're only here in the spring as they go through. They're only here in the fall as they go through. They don't overwinter unless you go out to the Guadalupe Mountains in that area and the Trans-Pecos region. They are permanent residents out there. Not very high numbers, but in this area, only captures in the fall and spring. And it's sort of a different thing. So pass through, again, exfoliated bark, all those dead tree snags and stuff out there, those are important for woodpeckers, they're important for birds, or all sorts of pickers and gleaners and stuff out there. They're important for bats that have this loose bark. Shagbark hickory that's in other places That loose exfoliated bark is very good for them as well. Lazarus, hairy, nictus, bat, Knox is the night, vagrant is wander, so a night wandering hairy bat. Northern long-eared myotis, two records from Texas. One is Dimmitt County. Oh, my finger come up. Okay, is way down here. So that was sometime, and then in 2019, I got a bat call and rescued a bat from a building in Grayson County. Second record in the state. It was a male non-breeding in, I believe, March of the year. So gray brown. The interesting thing here, they're not the big-eared bats, which have huge ears, but they have these fairly long ears. And if you fold them down, they'll extend past the nose, and they have long tragus that's longer than the other bats, except for the big-eared bats. So this one's here, wingspan. Again, the mid-sized bats hibernates caves and mines. Again, exfoliated bark, tree cavities, sometimes buildings and bat houses. Mouse otis, septentrionalis, it means northern out there. So this bat, again, it's one of the three species that occurs in North Texas that, or southern, that has been decimated. Again, about 90% of this bat has been wiped out by white nose syndrome as well. Not doing well. So be on the lookout, because well, I'll show you something here in a minute. Seminole bat, we're on the western edge of its range in this area. Further east, Seminole, where you might think Florida Seminoles. So you can think of that. Common in eastern Texas. Rich mahogany fur. So a marked difference in color. Captured one of these in McCurtain County out there. Resident in Texas, Spanish moss, again, foliated bark. Couple pups out there, and Seminoles, the Seminole Indians, was found near the type specimen, the original bat that they used to describe the species. So this one is picked up. Southeastern myotis, Myotis osteoparius, uncommon East Texas resident. Woolly fur. I mean, it's really dense woolly. It's a different texture. And once you capture one of these, that doesn't feel like a big brown one. So think of the difference between what would be a really woolly sheep versus a pig. No, not quite that extreme, but I mean, you've got this dense woolly fur that's out there. Hibernates in caves and mines, abandoned houses in Texas. Females congregate usually in the spring where they have a breeding swarm that occurs, and then the females go on their way. Sexually mature, next ready to go within a year. Cave bat over most of its range, but in Texas, it's been found in some culverts and abandoned houses. So further to the east, it's more in hardwood forests in riparian habitats, but it's expanded to other places out there. Cave myotis, there's a record, I think, from Dallas County here, but my experience with these is out in the caves of West Texas and Southwest Oklahoma, the gypsum caves out there. Captured some of these, was out testing radio telemetry. So I had little micro radio tags to put on Ozark Big-eared Bats to study that endangered species. Before we put them on an endangered subspecies, we wanted to make sure we knew what we were doing, because it was the first time we did it. So we went out west and used the Western Big-eared Bat. But as we went out there in our escort station wagon, it had a antenna with a little ball on top. And we were sitting there, ding, ding, ding. It was velifers, the cave myotis, hitting the little ball on top of the antenna. So I hope none chipped their teeth, but I mean, we hear it pinging all night long. So either they're, I shouldn't say they're not the brightest bat, but some of them, I don't know what was going on. They were dinging that thing all night long. But out west, they found pretty large colonies. You know, it might be 8 to 10,000, 5 to 10,000 females out there, young or early flyers in this one, about 5 weeks of age or 3 weeks of age, a little bit earlier than that. And there's some good records of people going in back in the day that would go in to observe the bats. They'd disturb them, and the females would pick them up and carry them to another place. The babies would cling to them, and they'd move them to another place. Usually wouldn't abandon them, but sometimes they would be abandoned, so you have to be careful. Little brown myotis, No record for Texas, but I include it here, and I'll show you here in a minute. It's Bryan County, right across the creek, that little river up there. Dark brown, ears, wings out there, hair. It's got hairy toes. Easiest way to tell. It's got hair. The hairs on the toes extend beyond the nails. Typically, other bats don't have that. And then you look at whether it has a keeled calcar or not, a bone in its ankle sticks out. And Indiana bats have a keeled calcar, but these don't. So form nursery colonies. This one has been, again, that's the third, the trifecta. The third bat that's been wiped out by white nose. About 90% of these are gone. Now you'll see some little brown bat skulls up here. These are bone clones. The original that was used was collected long, long, long ago before the endangered status. So, don't get after me. These are fake bone clone little brown bat skulls that you can see here pretty soon. Out there, one pup, least concern to endangered, just in a matter of a few, a decade. White nose has been crazy. So here's what I wanted to show you down here from either bat rescues or their study, and why I include some of these. In Bryan County, we have a couple of long-eared bats, 2 little brown bats, a silver-haired bat, and a tricolored bat. Choctaw County, northern, long-eared, tricolored, and over here we have northern long-eared, a raffinese bat, which is out in East Texas, probably not here, Coriolanus raffinese, and then Seminole bat here and tricolored bat. So these bats, and bats are not like pocket gophers. They are extremely agile and they can fly, and geopolitical boundaries and river courses don't really bother them. You're not seeing a pocket gopher do the backstroke across the Red River. No, but a bat can fly right over the top of it with no problem. So when I include these bats that are in North Texas or Southern Oklahoma, that's why they included especially the northern long-eared bat, because have one that I pulled off a building, and for the little brown bat, have them just across the creek in Oklahoma. So from just personal records of handling, and literally I've handled thousands of bats, of which many of them are little brown bats and many of them are northern long-eared bats. They used to be called Kings myotis, but that's a different story. Now, Molossidea, second family. Remember, all of those are Vespertilionids, the most common numerous species out there. Then we got the family Molossidea, and these are the free-tail bats. The easiest thing to think about a free-tail bat is when you look at the tail membrane between the legs, you'll see the caudal vertebrae or tail vertebrae extend beyond. It's a free tail. It's not in the tail membrane. Pretty easy to remember that. 110 species all over except Antarctica. Long tail that's out there, has some bristles out there, the long, narrow wings. Now, I have greater than 60 miles an hour. Well, I was doing some reading here not too long ago, and now they've been docked, clocked at 100 miles an hour. Straight line flight for short periods of time with radar, multiple times. So straight line flight, they're out there. They're not very maneuverable. They're these long pointed wings. They can't take off from the ground like a vampire bat after getting a full belly. So they need to drop down and get some lift generated, and then they go flying off. And oftentimes you see them coming out. They're in open spaces and they literally forage for miles. We'll talk about that. There's 4 in Texas, of which we have one that occurs up here, and that's a Brazilian free-tailed bat, or you'll see it as the Mexican free-tailed bat. A lot of people talk about the Mexican free-tailed bat because it mostly overwinters in Mexico, and then the females migrate north to give birth to their babies, and they're in the bridge at Austin and those other caves out there, Rio Frio and Eckert James River, Bracken, etc. Type specimen was from Brazil, Saltadera de Brasiliensis. That's usually, they call it in the scientific parlance, they refer to it as Brazilian, but it's the same thing as the Mexican free-tailed bat. Statewide out there, migratory north in the spring, south in the fall, overwinter down there, caves, mine wells out there. There's large maternity colonies. Like I mentioned before, Bracken Cave, 20 million females come up to give birth to their babies. Largest aggregation of mammals any place. One pup, long distance flyers. Some people say it's a coin name, or other people attribute it to a Corsican word for bat and Brasiliensis of Brazil, where the first one was found. Now, just quickly, these are the other Vespertiliana bats. So you see pictures of them. And I mean, strange, wonderful, beautiful, big ears, small ears, red, yellow, black, white. You see all sorts of different kinds of bats. Here's the southern yellow bats, Raphanus big-eared bat, California bat, long-legged myotis. So all sorts of Vespertilianids. Then here's the other family of bats out there. Remember, we had 4, but we only had the Brazilian freetail in this area. We have a big freetail bat in Texas, the greater bonneted out in West Texas, and the pocketed freetail out in West Texas. There's a more muped bat or ghost face bat here. Looks like it's run into a wall. And then we have the hairy-legged vampire bat is in the phylostomids, which is the spear-nosed bat. And here you can see, not all of them have it, but you see that little flap of skin. And the Mexican long nose and Mexican long tongue bat, they're feed on pollen and nectar. So that's all the species. Now, what do bats eat? Oh, all sorts of things. Had the pleasure of catching the bulldog bat or fishing bat, big old claws, flies over, detects fish swimming near the surface of the water at about a 90% efficiency rate, differentiates it from sticks and other things floating, catches it in those big grappling hooks, and then flies off. You have bats like the vampire bat, feed on blood meals. So fishing bat, piscivore, sanguinivore, the blood feeding bats. We have the false vampire bat, which is a carnivore. There's a wonderful article in National Geographic in the 80s about the frog eating bats. Oh, it's a never ending struggle between the frogs and the bats, because when the bats would come in and the frogs would be quiet. I mean, they'd know the bats were out, and so the frogs wouldn't croak. But if the frogs didn't croak, the males wouldn't attract females and they couldn't reproduce. So they usually waited till what? Dark nights when there wasn't very much moon, or cloudy nights, and then they'd croak. So a never ending game or struggle between the two. You have eating a katydid up here, a frugivore up here, pollinivore here. Sorry, feeding on pollen and nectar. And then they're eating a ground dwelling bug. Some bats will fly right near the surface, like a helicopter hovering. Now, imagine going back in time. You're a meteorologist. When you first got Doppler radar, oh, I mean, another article in National Geographic. You don't have to do anything but to pay attention to the red. This is at 9, 9:30, 10, and 10:30, I think. So 9 o'clock or 9:30, 9, 9:30. Let me get over his line. See. This is 9:30 here. This is 9, and this is a little bit later, and a little bit later. And what happens is when Doppler radar is out, first made available, people down in the Austin area were perplexed in San Antonio. Because all of a sudden, on their radar, they'd see this huge, what they thought was a cloud, big storm front coming in. Whoa, they'd send out storm chasers. I don't see anything here. Well, it was flocks or big masses of bats out flying. And you can see these places. So let me get over here. So right here's San Antonio. Here's Austin. Here's Bracken Cave, Ney Cave, Rio Frio Cave, Eckert James River Cave is in here. And all of these reds, that's bats. So almost nothing while the sun's still up. After. It just clouds the sky. It's estimated, and don't ask me how they do it, They're estimating about 100 million bats flying over the hill country on a summer night now. 100 million bats flying over the hill country. Now, this is a picture of Bracken Cave. All these are bats coming out of there. Let's go to something a little different. Here's the Ozark Big-eared Bats. When we did our radio telemetry studies, the maximum distance we tagged the female was about 7.5, 8 kilometers from the cave. So they would cluster around, and the cornurinus means lumpy nose, and you can see the lumps on the nose here. So different things. Problems facing bats, loss of roost sites in caves and mines. Okay. If you used to go to Silver Dollar City long ago, there used to be Ozark Big-eared Bats there. After they opened up, the last reported one is, there hasn't been any reported since the early 1980s. They used to be there. So caves and mines are being closed or commercialized or whatever, and that impacts bat habitat. Then habitat loss, including deforestation. So you got subterranean or below ground habitat, and then you have surface habitat as well out there. Harmful chemicals by humans. So, you know, there's still a lot of bats at Carlsbad, but the spraying of toxic chemicals out there decimated them. I mean, when you used to have not 10 million bats, but you had 40 or 50 million bats that were down in that area. Out there, we got deforestation, some wind farms out there, predators out there, and some of the islands. Here's one of the islands out there. You know, some people celebrate Thanksgiving by having a turkey. Well, on this particular island, they would have a bat and coconut milk. That was their feast for that particular year. So I got a recipe if you want. I haven't tried it, but do have the recipe. So there's that. And then the elephant in the room is white nose syndrome. White nose syndrome, cold loving fungus out there, discovered in New York 2006. 2022, 38 states. That's up to 40 states now and 10 Canadian provinces. The numbers of bat species out there are continuing to increase. 90% of the northern long-eared, little brown, and tricolored bats have disappeared from the face of the planet. Oklahoma, first fungus found in 15, disease 2017 in the same cave. Fungus first found in the Panhandle in 2017 in Texas, and then 2020, the disease. It's growing, it's impacting, it's having a big problem, but it started out in the east here, and then it just spread westward, and then it made the jump over here, and it's changed markedly. I had 19 caves in the Ozark Big-eared Bat study that I'd go and I didn't worry about it. This was pre-white nose, that I would go in a cave and take microclimate temperatures and then leave and then go to another cave to see what kinds of caves they were using. Now you go into a cave, then you're wearing a hazmat suit and you're stripping down and doing all sorts of cleansing protocols so you don't carry that fungus from one cave to another cave. Now, good news, a lot of research is being spent. So they've got some stuff where there's an oral vaccine, but who wants to, maybe somebody, but it's not very time efficient, giving drops in the mouth of a bat. It works well, but if you're talking lots and lots of bats, that's hard to do. There's UV radiation. Sometimes, if you remember, let's say back in the day, you took a chemistry class and had to wear goggles, and then they were shared goggles. They were usually put in a UV treatment so that it would sterilize them. Well, like a fire hydrant put in the cave, something about that size. When the bats aren't there, broadcast UVC, I think is the particular wavelength, and it sterilizes at least some. There's been some success with that. Temperature differential, there's a sweet spot for the fungus to grow about 12 to 16 degrees C. If you get below that by a couple degrees, it slows the fungal growth down. There's been some positive things there, but when you do that, you change the dynamics of the cave. airflow or whatever's going on. And the bats really love those cold places. Ozark Big-eared Bats love the coldest place in the coldest portion of the caves. They were occupying spaces that were getting down to about 8 to 9 degrees C. Very chilly, chilly, chilly. And their body temperatures were there, and they curl their ears up to protect themselves. And then there's probiotics, a healthy gut helping them fight. That hasn't received a lot. There's another thing where an fungal agent that they powder and then they aerosolize it and spray it in the cave, and then the bats get it on their wings, and that's shown some success. And then essential oils they've used, they've abandoned that one. It had some positive response, but they aerosolize spray, and then for a couple of years it seemed to be positive, but then maybe it's just fluke because then the white nose started becoming more prevalent in the test caves. So research is being done. The bizarre thing is there might be hope is bats in the old world, especially Europe, they coexist with white nose. It's thought that the appearance of that fungus in bats sort of evolved together, co-evolved. So they have a resistance or tolerance to that. Can you think of something that happened in the United States when what? When Europeans settled this country, what happened to the indigenous people that were never exposed to those things before? Same thing with the bats. This is a relatively novel thing, 2006 that appeared. Bats have been around here for a long, long, long time. But in Europe, that same type of fungus was around long ago. And there's one sort of hypothesis going on. They co-evolved to how to exist. Because if you wipe out everything that you want to live on, that's not a good strategy either. So white nose, working on it. It's a problem out there. Endangered bats across here. Northern long-eared is out there. Tricolored and the little brown are proposed for listing as endangered now. The northern long-eared, tricolored, and that are all in this area, I think. I mean, we haven't got the little brown here, but I got them across the creek. I've got northern long-eared in Grayson County, and the tricolored, yes, we've got them here in this area as well. A Hawaiian hoary bat, just it's out there, Mexican long-nosed bat, Virginia big-eared bat, and I've had the good fortune of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, handling 6 of these bats, and then of course the tricolored and the little brown as well. Benefits of bats, pollinators. So about a quarter of the economically important plants. You like bananas, wild bananas pollinated by bats. You like cashews, pollinated by bats. You like figs, pollinated by bats. On and on and on. Lots of economically important things are pollinated by bats out there. Insect predators. I mean, think of 100 billion bats eating, let's say, a third of their body weight. Not all of them are as voracious as the vampire bats. That's a lot of bugs that you're not having to treat or spray for. Seed dispersal, they eat some seeds and they fly someplace and deposit some guano. And then probably my favorite story to tell kids is we exist as a country because of bat guano. You say, what? And that's what they say, at least. So anybody know the story of Battle of Bunker Hill? Yeah. So, the soldiers for the United States were top of the hill. The British were at the bottom of the hill. And the supposed commander of the United States forces, wasn't United States at the time, but the colonial forces, said, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. Now, how does that relate to bat guano? Well, the British had a big navy, and that big navy blockaded a lot of ports, and we couldn't import gunpowder from France or other allies. We had to make our own. And what did we make our own gunpowder from? Bat crap. Bat guano. Very much like saltpeter, which is used in making gunpowder. So I always tell the kids, when he said, don't fire until you see the whites of the eyes, think of bat guano, because that's why we're a country. Help us defeat the British during the Revolutionary War. That might be a slight stretch, but take a little liberty. Same thing happened during the Civil War as well. The Union forces had a pretty good naval blockade, a lot of ports, and the Confederate soldiers harvested a lot of bat guano and made a lot of gunpowder from that as well, because there's a lot of big important caves down in the southern portion of the country out there. Problems, rabies, histoplasmosis. Rabies, probably the worst thing out there. I think only one person that I can find has ever survived rabies without getting vaccinated. That wasn't until somewhat recently. When I worked with vampire bats, I had the old duck embryo rabies virus from way back when. And now I don't know how it worked, but now had all of my students working on the bat projects get vaccinated for rabies, just like your vet gets vaccinated for rabies. And then you get a bit, oftentimes you go get your titer count, see if you got a good resistance to the rabies. And if not, you get a booster. It's not a pleasant thing out there. Histoplasmosis is aerosolized in the guano deposit stain. And in contrast to what some people want to say, the SARS-CoV-2, the cause of COVID-19, has not been found in bats. They have a different type of coronavirus, the horseshoe bats in Asia, but it's not SARS-CoV-2, the one that caused the coronavirus. Okay. So you have to be careful. And if you don't take anything else from this, and this is what I tell students when I go there, if you see a bat on the ground, don't pick it up without having gloves or something to protect yourself. A bat on the ground, something's wrong with it. It's sick, it's been blown there. And if you're walking up on it and you're this big and it's a little big bat, this wing like that, it's going to scratch and claw and bite and do anything it can to get away from you. So you don't want to leave it there. You want to get rid of it. Call me, I'll come get it. Or remove it, but make sure you're protected. And kids, I always tell them, get a policeman, get your mom or dad or big brother or sister or somebody to remove it, because that's not a good thing. If that's the one thing they take away, because there's no need to go through the rabies vaccination process. It's not fun, and just avoid that situation at all. And in all the bats that I've handled, I think only one may have been, something was wrong with it. It was just a sickly looking bat out of literally thousands of bats. What can you do? Be bat friendly. Bat friendly, don't go into caves and mines during important times. If their bats are overwintering and sleeping, hibernating, don't go in there and bother them. You wake them up, they don't have anything to eat, and they're going to lose weight, and that's not good for them. If they're in there with a maternity colony, don't do it. Put up bat houses, maybe you'll be luckier than I. And then join a conservation group. There's all sorts of things. Bat Conservation Trust, Bat Conservation International, Bat Life. A lot of caving groups are out for bat protection out there. Told you I'd come back to Wufu, Chinese symbol. I had the pleasure of going to China. I probably shouldn't say this, but I was in China in February, about 2 weeks before COVID hit. Got lucky, recruiting students for Southeastern to come over and be exchange students. And I was literally about 150 miles away from Wuhan. So I dodged the bullet there. But, so I had good luck. The Chinese symbol called Wufu. If you look around the perimeter of this, there's a bat, there's more bats in here. This was at a wedding venue that we had dinner at. And these bats, there's supposed to be 5 of them. The traditional means long life, wealth, good health, virtue, and a peaceful death. So that's pretty good luck if you have those 5 things in your life. So Wufu, you'll see in all sorts of places. If you have a chance, Bat Fest, September 6th this year, go down to Austin Congress Avenue Bridge and you'll see lots of people having fun there as it goes on. And what you'll see is people down in the river, kayaks, boats, tours, all sorts of people taking lots of pictures, and there are bands playing and all sorts of stuff going on. So please go there if you have an opportunity. It's a wonderful site. And if you have a chance, go to Bracken Cave, get there. Lots of things there. People helped with this, and I'll answer some questions and do that about Sorry.
Do we, thank you so much. Do we have any questions? Okay, hold on. Okay.
Okay, so can you hear me? Is that okay? So I'm curious about like recently I live in Houston and recently we have as you guys did too here in Dallas, we had really cold weather a couple of years I guess last year and then a couple of years before that. Yeah, maybe in 21. Anyway, there was a house a couple of doors down from me that had bats. The attic was just full of them. So in the evenings, we would see that the bats start dropping down and fly out. I guess they were maybe like the mosquito eating bats because we could see them all over. And I'm just wondering what happened to those bats when it dropped to, because the houses were like, I mean, it was freezing for days and days.
Okay, in the house, oftentimes the climate's going to be, or the internal temperature is going to be warm enough. Bats, how would you say it? It'll be above freezing oftentimes, or they'll thermally regulate in that tight cluster and keep their bodies there. But bats are notorious for dropping their body temperature almost to the ambient temperature around. So like I said, I mentioned Ozark Big-eared Bats, their preferred roosting site every winter, and they'd move around in caves, would be, barely above freezing. Big brown bat would be the same. Yeah.
Snow again.
Yeah, no. And yeah, at the same time, there's some residual heat for a bit of time, and then bats typically in winter will cluster. So tight. You're out of luck if you're on the outside, but if you're in the middle, what you have is bats that are bats. Let's see, bats are mammals in general are homeothermic endotherms. They produce the heat energy from within, and they maintain a constant body temperature. But bats are heterothermic, that they adjust their body temperature literally every day. And what they'll do is they'll spend more energy. And if they have to go through it, it's called shivering thermogenesis. They're burning fat reserves to shiver. And as they shiver, that's causing heat energy to be produced, just like you shiver when you get cold. So if you got a big cluster of tightly knit bats, and some of the maximum clusters that you'll see out there might be up to 900 bats per square foot. I mean, they're packed in there, have a high packing density, so they're tightly clustered. Certain bats, like big-eared bats, have these huge old ears that stick out. They roll them up like ram's horns so they're not sticking out and getting rid of heat energy. So they're tight to their head. So they have, strategies, but probably I would say they went through, at least for a period of time, some shivering thermogenesis or producing body heat just to stay warm. And oftentimes they'll move around a little bit in those clusters. Yeah. There's a lot of bats in the Houston area, so. Yeah. Yeah, and there's a couple of caves, but I wouldn't think they'd be a free-tailed bat, but there's a couple of bridges in Houston that are occupied, like the Congress Avenue Bridge as well. But what kinds of bats? There's a host of possibilities.
Hi. You mentioned earlier that they kind of fly around in a circle before leaving a cave or something like that. Do we know why they do that, or is it to just orient themselves or something?
Well, what you'll see is oftentimes they'll start almost in the dark part of the cave, and then they're literally testing how much light there is. They're swirling and checking it out. It's a little bit bright yet, a little bit bright yet. And then once it reaches a certain amount of light, it goes down as the sun sets, it gets dark enough, then they start boiling out. And you get a few that will trickle out, the ones that are, willing to take a chance. But usually it's testing and getting ready. And some of it is, getting ready to fly. Like most any of us, we got to stretch out a little bit before we exercise. And they're getting ready to fly 100 miles, give or take, 50 miles out, 50. Think of flying up to the Red River and back every night on a foraging run. So a couple of things that just get loosened up. And if you wake up a bat, bats go through two big things, or some species in this area. They go through daily torpor. So they're letting their body temperature go down and they're slowing their metabolic rate down and their heart rate down and their respiration down every day. Bats are long lived relative to other animals that size. A mouse might live 2 to 4 years max that size. A bat will live 15, 20, 25, up to 30 years. Actually caught in Iowa, we caught a little brown bat. Here it comes back again, a little brown bat at Manchester State Fish Hatchery in Delaware County, Iowa, 24 years after it was banded by R.F. Laval at the same location. So we know it's 24 years old at least. We don't know how old it was when it was banded. And it was at the same place. What it did in the other 23 years, I don't know. But we at least had a longevity estimate, and as well as some roost fidelity, at least in those two data points. So lowering their body temperature, metabolic rate for torpor, and then hibernation is even more extreme when they shut down for winter. They do it even more so.
I have 3 questions from home.
Oh,
The first one is, in the nursery colony, will the pups nurse off any female, or is it specific to their mother?
nurse different babies? Yeah. There are some species of bats that are known to nurse other pups. But usually moms are pretty good at finding their pups. I mean, they use typically 3 locations or 3 things to get located. They know the basic spot of where the bat baby is. Just like you or somebody might recognize their grandkids or kids on the phone, they recognize their baby's cry, and then they recognize their baby's scent. So most of the time they're going to be nursing their own, but sometimes they do cross nurse.
Okay, this person says, I've heard several people say Mexican free-tailed bats are a different species from the Brazilian free-tailed. Thoughts?
I would say no. No, I don't.
Okay.
It's a same name, and it's depending on whether typically you're a lay person or a person scientific. So, I mean, the name is Tidera brasiliensis, and that's the same thing that the people at, let's say, Congress Avenue talk about Mexican free-tailed bats flying out there. That's the Brazilian free-tailed bat, Tidera brasiliensis. It's from the type specimen is from Brazil, and that's why that epithet is given to it. Mexican, because the bats here, most of them migrate from Mexico and come up north to our caves and mines, and they're given that common name. So it's just like some of our bats here have a different common name over in Europe, same species, but different common name. Or some of the sandpipers have a different common name over in Europe as they have here. So,
And finally, are the cave-dwelling species more likely to colonize bat boxes than the tree-dwelling species?
I think it's the luck of the draw on that. There are certain species that are known for that, but most of them, if you go back in time, red bats, hoary bats, those types of bats, Seminole bats, are tree dwellers, and they don't go into buildings, caves, bat boxes, or anything else. If you go to the other bats before people were here, they were probably in caves or cavities or other things like that. So more than likely, if they want to go down that road, those cave dwelling those cavity nesters, not under the leaves and branches of trees. Hoary bats sometimes go there, but and red bats, but usually not. They're out in the open.
Okay.
But if you're a cavity nester or a cave mine, then yes, more likely to use buildings.
This is kind of a follow-up to that. What's the best place to put a bat box, the height?
Not in my backyard, not at about 15 feet, but best height. I mean, a couple things go into play. It depends on how cluttered the environment is. Most of the bats, when they're flying in, will want to drop down and then come up to attack to land coming from the ground up. So they'll swoop down and come up. And so you need a appropriate flyway that's uncluttered. And usually if you have at least 12 to 15 feet, you're good. Sometimes 10 feet might work, but they're flying in, they dive down, they come up and splat. And you see this bottom board on a bat box. That's the landing pad. They hit that, then they crawl up in there. So they're not going to fly in their face first like the ghost face bat that's in there saying that. They're going to and land just like that. So 12 to 15 feet, if you get it higher, that's great. I'm trying to, okay, other questions?
Oh, no, that was great. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. We have a token of appreciation here for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bryon does have some displays up here if there's room to walk on both sides of the table. And then we do need some help cleaning up. Mr. Dave? How do we need to leave the room? How do we need to leave the room?
I don't know. I think you'll put all the tables and chairs, right?
Yeah.
Somebody else figure it out.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.